Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory, where sometimes I look at movies that everyone's talking about, or at least the ones that refuse to stop trending on TikTok or social media or whatever, whatever the kids are using nowadays. And today I'm looking into After We Collided, the second movie in the After film series, based on Anna Todd's novels that started as One Direction fanfiction. Yes, you heard that right. And I did review the original installment simply titled After. And this is me kind of continuing my semi hate watching of this franchise. So, um, I'm gonna try to not bash the movie too much. I'm gonna try to be objective and say what people like about the movie and also what some critics will say about the movie. Some people who spit venom at this franchise. So, After We Collided hit theaters in 2020, so not that long ago, just 5 years back, and it was directed by Roger Kumble, or is it pronounced Kumble? I don't know. But anyway, he apparently directed the film Cruel Intentions, which I definitely heard about, but I still have not watched that movie. I'm sort of under the impression that it's kind of a steamy romance movie or like a thriller or something like that, with a thriller with sexual aspects to it or something. But genre wise, After We Collided is a romantic drama pitched squarely at young adults. But let's be real, it's not just romance, it's the toxic roller coaster brand of romance that either keeps you hooked or drives you up the wall. Personally, I didn't feel that emotional while watching this movie. I found it, kind of boring to tell you the truth, because really not a whole lot actually happens. There were just some arguments here and there, and it's kind of a generic story, to tell you the truth. It's not so bad it's good or anything like that. It's not an offensive movie to me. It wasn't so offensive that I have strong feelings about it. So let's look at the stars, the main cast. We've got Josephine Langford back as Tessa Young, the good girl at the center of it all. She's a little bit more mature in this movie in terms of her attitude and outlook. She's not quite as stereotypically innocent. She seems more like a grown up than a high schooler in this film. And let's face it, she's not a bad uh she's not bad looking. That doesn't hurt. And I guess the actor who plays her love interest, whose name is Hero Finds Tiffin. I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing that correctly. But anyway, he plays a character named Hardin Scott. So, yes, you've got Tessa Young and Hardin Scott. The, the good girl versus the bad boy. Certainly in a way. Hardin Scott is the brooding bad boy love interest, and of course he has serious baggage or something like that. There's a bit of drama just built into that character. And then there's Dylan Sprouse as Trevor Matthews, a new character introduced in this sequel. He's a coworker of Tessa's internship, or at Tessa's internship, I should say, and yes, a possible love interest. Now, to me, he seems to be sort of an intentionally boring character. Not that these other two characters are particularly exciting for me, but I think they wanted to have somebody who is just, straight down the road kind of character. Nothing too wild and crazy going on with him. He's straight laced, doesn't really have that much of a personality, frankly. As far as I could tell, he's just there at the job, and supposedly, he's like the potential love interest of Tessa Young. Although, of course, we know that the likelihood of them actually falling in love is minimal because Hardin Scott is there. He's there to be the main source of the story, really. So the story picks up right where the first film left off, and if you want to watch after, you go ahead and watch that beforehand and see how exciting it is for you. Hopefully, it'll be more exciting for you than it was for me. You know, Tessa and Hardin are in the thick of their turbulent relationship. Tessa starts the internship at a publishing company where she meets Trevor, who is basically everything that Hardin isn't. Boy, that was kind of hard for me to stay. Jesus Christ, I'm stumbling all over the place. Anyway, Trevor is stable, polite, and not prone to throwing tantrums the way that Hardin does. And that makes the character of Hardin a little bit annoying because that's kind of all he's gonna do for the most part. He's gonna throw some tantrum or be a source of some turmoil. I said source. I'm getting all jumbled up as I talk here. I guess maybe this movie is kind of bringing out emotions in me that I didn't think that it would, and it's throwing my word associations out of whack. I'm kind of getting mixed up here. Maybe this film did tug at my heartstrings, a little bit. Anyway, Hardin continues to struggle with jealousy, volatility, and his troubled past. The movie leans heavily into themes of trust, forgiveness, and honestly, toxic love. Now, in the previous review, I kind of mentioned how I'm not that concerned about the movie depicting quote unquote toxic relationships because if if the characters all just got along perfectly and were just perfectly fine, nothing going wrong, no source of drama or whatever, well then the movie would be even more boring than it actually is. I mean, there's got to be some type of conflict in order for there to be a story. Otherwise, what do you have? You just have people getting along and singing kumbaya, falling in love, and it's like, okay, what is the issue that the story is supposed to be grappling with? Because frankly, if a movie or any stories like that, it'll be too much like there's a there's a Simpsons episode where they feature the cat and mouse characters of Itchy and Scratchy, and they're actually just getting along, because Marge had, started a censorship movement because of the violence in that cartoon. And one of the jokes in that episode is that Itchy and Scratchy are just sitting on a porch and they're sharing lemonade, and like that's the whole cartoon. Well, that's sort of like the issue here. Like if these characters just get along perfectly and there's no quote or there's no quote unquote toxic behavior, then you don't really have much of a story. And yes, there's a lot of heated romance. The sequel is a little bit more explicit, you might say, than the first film, and that earned it an R rating in the United States. But don't be fooled here. It's not explicit in like a pornographic sense or anything. I don't remember seeing any nudity in this movie. I mean, certainly not any explicit nudity. Now, I'm enough of a horn dog that I think I would remember if there were some jiggling boobies in this one. I didn't notice that. So it's a relatively safe movie to watch. Like if you've got kids or whatever, and you're concerned about nudity. I don't recall that being in this movie. I think it's rated R mostly for language, maybe some alcohol use and some. I don't remember. There might be some drug use somewhere at some point, because you're dealing with youth culture, and of course those young little hooligans are going to be getting high somewhere. That's just what people do. Especially those young adults, or high schoolers. Of course, they're going to be getting high. That's like an inevitability. So that might happen somewhere in this movie. I actually don't I actually don't remember. But anyway, there's the fact that it has an R rating. Make of that what you want. So, how was it received by the critics? Well, the critics hated it. Probably a little bit too much. It's like sometimes critics watch things and they're like, I'm going to be so honest against this movie that I'm going to just bash it and not look for anything good in it. And I think that's kind of what happened here with the critics. I think they went on a bandwagon. They just hopped on the bandwagon. They saw maybe other critics were panning this film, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to critique it too. What the hell? And sure enough, the movie isn't that great. So I'm not going to distance myself too much from other critics here. But at the same time, there are definitely far worse movies that I've seen. In fact, the reviews are overwhelmingly negative about this movie because it's melodramatic, shallow, and unhealthy in its portrayal of relationships. But again, what are you going to do? You're eventually going to need a source of conflict. A character has to have flaws, so it seems like too much of the critiques of this movie were just sticking with that whole aspect of how the relationships portrayed. And it reminds me of these people who are like, oh, if I'm watching a horror movie, I don't want my villain to, target these vulnerable groups or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I understand that, on the surface, but we're talking about villains here. And the same thing applies to Harden. He is essentially kind of like the villain character in this piece. So you got to expect him to do a few bad things, and that's what the fans like about this movie. Now it's a totally different story for some of the fans than the critics. Like, obviously, this is a very successful film franchise, so in a way, you should really respect that. Like, if you're reviewing it, you should at least acknowledge that it's a popular film franchise. It has numerous installments, even after this one. I think there are three other movies after this, which is a little bit crazy. And I think there are two other movies in development as I speak. So it obviously has some fans, and I think an honest critic should try to understand, why people are drawn to this sort of story. And I think personally, it is because it is kind of a generic story. People might see themselves in the characters, they might relate to some of the fights that they have in the movie or something like that. It is a little bit realistic as a story. So I think that's one positive thing I would say about it, that these characters seem like they could exist in real life. And that might not sound like high praise, but it is actually a thing that's worth noting, because certainly not every story can achieve that. And book fans were more forgiving about this movie too, even embracing the more intense romance compared to the first film. And box office wise, it killed, especially overseas. In fact, it did well enough to secure more sequels, like I mentioned, which is why we got After We Fell in 2021, After Ever Happy in 2022. Well, I still don't know what the hell that title is going for After Ever Happy. No, no, no. They should have had a different title than that one. But anyway, there's another movie that came out in 2023 called After Everything, but they're still not done. So, what makes this franchise so polarizing is also what makes it so popular. For some viewers, the Tessa Hardin relationship is addictive, like the ultimate will they, won't they ride. And for others, it's a mess of toxic behaviors dressed up as passion. And to me, like this particular movie, I definitely saw the passion between the two characters, but I still didn't really feel that drawn to the story. Just because you have characters who have strong feelings for each other. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just not romantic enough, or whatever. I'm not enough into the soap opera style storytelling. Although I do watch Young and the Restless with my mom whenever I go visit her. So I'm not totally an outsider when it comes to these sort of soap opera will they won't they relationship kind of stories. In fact, I think this movie could use a little bit of something beyond the characters, which is beyond their love, their relationship, because soap operas kind of get that. They understand, you sometimes have to make the story really bizarre, like they have kidnapping plots and you know just dark little story paths that soap operas will go down. And this movie I think needs, or this franchise needs, something beyond just their relationship in order for it to really sustain my interest. you know like how about just adding a different dynamic, and not even for any special reason, just for variety's sake, so it's not just kind of rehashing the same type of stuff over and over again. But like it or not, After We Collided became a cultural moment, fueling conversations about young adult romance in media. Some argue that it's refreshingly raw, showing how messy relationships can be. Others argue it romanticizes the kind of dynamics that in real life are more damaging than dramatic. Well, I mean, I should amend that to say that of course it can be both damaging and dramatic. But I guess the point I'm trying to make there is that when you act like this in real life, it's gonna be a bad time for you. So at the end of the day, After We Collided is a movie that people love to hate, or they maybe just plain love it. It's a little more explicit than the first film, more dramatic and more divisive than the first film, and it really made the After series as a romantic uh, staple, I guess you might say. So whether you see it as a guilty pleasure escapism story or a, I guess, problematic love story, there's no denying this movie's had an impact, just like the first one did. And wow, I think I've said enough about about this movie. So if you've got strong feelings about Hardin and Tessa, love them or loathe them, I want to hear from you about that. So drop me a line and let's keep the conversation going. I'm sure you might disagree with some things I said about the movie. So, you know, you can let me know how much you hated what I had to say in this episode, or how much you appreciated something I said. So, thanks for listening, and until next time, hasta la vista, baby.